Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Michelle Whitty. I'm here with John Kiriakou. We're remembering how to do our jobs, and we hope that you guys are too. And we got news to talk about, because it turns out that's what we do. We're going to talk about what is going on in the city of Buffalo and what citizens should expect from their city and state governments, and whether in this case it is a little bit more than they've gotten. We are going to talk about federal rebuilding assistance and foster care charges, and talk a little bit about where money flows to and where it flows from. We are going to further explore that theme in an interesting newsletter in Bloomberg about the 2022 for cryptocurrency and what cryptocurrency should tell us about many other financial institutions that we take for granted. We're going to talk a little bit of politics if we have time. It's a whole lot to get into, and joining us for it is Steve Grumbine. He's the founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. He hosts the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. We love having him. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing great. How are you all?
Terrific.
Great, thank you.
As you said, you remember, tapping the microphone, going, is this thing on? How we do this again? But it's been fun. We were just talking in the last segment about this sort of the airline chaos over the weekend. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the havoc that has been wreaked upon planet Earth and how much of it is avoidable. In Buffalo now, I believe the latest death toll, the latest that I have seen is up to 29. I think John saw 31.
Yeah, in Buffalo.
In Buffalo, yeah, not across the country. Doesn't really matter what it is right now, because it seems likely to climb as people are going to be discovered, in their homes, in their cars, et cetera. And, they had, I think, nearly 3 days of whiteout conditions. They got something like 50 inches of snow. And of course, in that scenario, you are going to see death and you are going to see disasters. As of yesterday, just 10,000 people were out without power, which New York officials are treating as a victory. That had been millions before, though that might have been a figure for up and down or across the country. So it's 10,000 now, and they're saying that's great.
Wow.
But a number of Buffaloans online are saying that the state and city governments have really let them down. They're asking in particular where the snow plows are. They're asking where the food and heating centers are. They're asking where the communication is, because what they are seeing from government officials is, celebration of search and rescue crews, which is great, but not a lot of information about how to get basic services. And so, while they are offering no help to people who might be hungry or concerned that their ceilings are going to fall in on them, you also see this focus on crime and looting. And as was announced just a couple of hours ago by the Erie County executive, you have 100 military police and additional troopers coming to Buffalo for traffic control and ticketing, because there are driving bans in effect. And so, of course, you don't want people on roads that are unsafe and creating more people who are going to need to be rescued. But you also have people saying, you're not, people are getting hungry. If you didn't have food stocked up for this storm, you're hungry in your home. And what are you supposed to do? There's no information about where to go. So I just want to ask, how much of this chaos is inevitable and how much is a policy choice?
Well, I think that it's a combination of federal, state, and local incompetence. And incompetence is an extremely generous word in this space. I believe in my heart of hearts that, before Build Back Better came out, the Green New Deal, which we had oftentimes talked about, had been denigrated because it was really a framework for a larger proposal. Those kinds of efforts need to come from the currency issuer at the federal level, because the states, especially a place like Buffalo, and it doesn't take a great mind and a deep memory to think back a few years to where Buffalo was a ghost town and people weren't thriving there. It was drying up like a Pittsburgh of the 70s and 80s, right, or Harrisburg even. It was a desolate, pseudo Rust Belt kind of environment.
Mm-hmm.
And now that it's coming back, it still does not have the kind of tax space at that local level. It's a blue collar town. Yes, Buffalo has been gentrified some, and yes, it's been prettied up, but their tax base is largely blue collar, working class people. It requires a currency issuing government at the federal level to be able to provide the kind of help in these kind of scenarios. But unfortunately, these kind of scenarios don't happen all the time. So it's very hard to make people prepare for something they don't see in front of them until it becomes a disaster. Once it becomes a disaster, for about 15 minutes, you got everyone's attention. And so I think you've got so many issues piled into one here that makes this scenario almost inevitable, sadly, that in the absence of broader-minded system thinking from politicians and even the people in the local communities, all the way up to communicating back and forth with the federal government to prepare for this sort of thing. Our power grid, we already know across the country, from Texas, which has been privatized and shortcuts made in the name of capital. All these things have happened that have denigrated our ability to provide life-saving, absolute assured, power to homes, heating, food, you name it. I believe that this is sadly a long-term solution is required, and it requires someone with a visionary view of all the problems to be able to attack.
Yeah.
And I don't think that those local people, quite frankly, are up to the task. They don't have the money. They don't have the revenue stream to facilitate broad-minded ideals. And so it would require an intervention at the federal government. And if you've seen our federal government lately, you know that no help is coming anytime soon.
Yeah. I'm just looking at, child poverty rates in American cities. Earlier this year, it was Syracuse, New York, that was number one. But Buffalo is number 6. And again, you think if you're a family living in poverty, how many days' food at a time can you buy?
Right. Good
and
point.
then what the city's solution here is to send out police officers to make sure you don't, where do you live near a grocery store? Can you walk to one? Can you walk to one in blizzard conditions? No? Okay, cool. Well, here's a cop to come and ticket you if you leave after 3 days because that was the amount of food. It just seems like everything is policed. That's the solution to every crisis.
It is. I don't, John, you may remember this better, and I shouldn't say it. Michelle, you may know this too. But a few years back in England, Grenfell Towers burned to the ground.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Lots of people died.
Right.
Okay, lots of people died. And that right there was an exact case of austerity as murder. Okay?
Absolutely
this was
right.
An opportunity to tend to the infrastructure of that building, to tend to the needs, the common sense needs. But the response, and this is so important because you can't just take it in an isolated way. You must understand this is a belief system. The people were saying, I would rather people died than give up private property.
Yeah.
I would rather people die than give up private property.
Yeah.
And this is the thinking. This is why you see the cops coming out there protecting the haves from the ne'er-do-good have-nots who are hungry, desperate for shelter, etc. This is a political decision baked in libertarian, baked in right-wing, free market fundamentalist, laissez-faire nonsense, capitalism with the big C. And it is something that unless we have a concerted effort to decimate that mindset and to eradicate it from the public space, whenever you get to these moments, you're going to have to hearken back to this conversation to remember it's not an I told you so. It's more so that it's the same exact story each time.
Yeah.
Local communities have been decimated financially because, quite frankly, the money isn't making it from the top down to the bottom, and the bottom is these communities. And so the people that do have something are always going to be the ones that are protected because it's all about private property and moneyed interests. And so you'll always see cops thrown out there to prevent this kind of horrible, hey, I'm hungry, so I'm going to steal a loaf of bread. Oh my God, you're a criminal, put them in jail.
Yep.
They would rather fund that than fund the facilitation of public services and fund the public purpose, which would make these people whole before we even had a crisis.
Yeah. And, of course, after a disaster, there's the recovery. And Politico today has a story about how the Department of Housing and Urban Development has distributed grants to help people rebuild after Hurricane Sandy that found that 15% of the total $44 million that was supposed to go to help low-income homeowners went to the owners of homes that were worth more than $1 million.
Yeah.
12 of them were worth more than, I think, $2.5 million. Meanwhile, the median home value in Connecticut is about $311,000, which is lower than I thought it was going to be, actually. And this happened because in 2013, HUD changed its rules to allow the disaster relief program to also reimburse wealthy homeowners. This was done after Hurricane Sandy, and this rule change has been applied to other programs in the aftermath of other disasters. FEMA has also been accused of distributing money that should go to help poor people in flood-prone areas raise their homes, to distributing that money to people who definitely did not need it. And, in theory, Steve, like if we live in the kind of society that I would like to live in, I don't have a problem with the government helping out everybody, but there's never enough to go around. And so in this scenario, it seems outrageous to be giving grants of like $150,000 to people whose homes are worth $2 million or more.
I want you to split two things. I want you to split monetary austerity and real resource austerity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you think about the monetary side, that money can be created out of thin air at any time. All Congress has to do is pass a bill. You have to ask yourself why Congress won't do that. Just simple.
Mm-hmm.
You got to ask that question. The answer you come up with will inform every other thing downstream from that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as long as there is lumber, as long as there is, concrete and there's rebar for, foundations, there's windows and doors and ceilings and wood and whatever, as long as you've got that real resource base, any of this stuff can be done for anyone. The real issue comes down to the privilege of being the moneyed class.
Yeah.
And we bake in this fake austerity narrative, this false scarcity narrative that makes us believe that we're short on money.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take into consideration that we're not short on resources. And why is that a thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because resources are privately owned, okay? So in order to access those privately owned resources, the federal government would need to negotiate with those private actors as opposed to using eminent domain or seizing that stuff under some sort of a, government says, hey, this is an emergency, we're stepping in and we're taking care of it. This is literally making everyone feel like we don't have the money.
Mm-hmm.
Is the gateway to preventing us from asking for this to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just automatically walk through the door assuming that the one thing that they can create out of thin air instantly, money, is the scarce thing. When in reality, what is scarce is homes, and food, and stuff like that, that would easily be brought to these reclamation projects. And I had a friend whose house was swept away along the beach in New Jersey during Sandy, and the whole house was basically just filled with salt water and pretty much destroyed. But they got tons of money to rebuild that house, and he told me it took a very, very long time to get through the process, and they were painful, and they would have to make many, many phone calls and so forth. They intentionally make this stuff very hard to do for a reason.
Yeah.
It's like when you go into an unemployment office. That unemployment office has a broken clock on the wall. It's got tape on the chairs in the waiting room. It's not because they can't afford to get you a chair that's not taped up. It's because they want to make sure you feel the pain of being poor. They want you to feel gross about being there. They don't want you to think of it as a place for service. They want you to think that you're taking. So they build all these things into the program. They keep it scarce. They don't fund it properly. And they make sure that in the end, it doesn't work. So everybody says government doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's a big racket. They do it on purpose.
And this is, the pain of being poor is sort of the theme of the next question I want to bring up. But, on the topic of resources versus money, I didn't intend to talk about this today, but I was listening to, it was either, it was one of the morning news roundups that I listened to. And they mentioned something happening in a famine-prone country. And I just thought, wow, it really struck me as, just sort of incorrect and really unfeeling, right? Famine-prone countries. And again, this is not because, we talk about hunger in the Horn of Africa right now, and in Yemen, and in Afghanistan. And as you're saying, the problem is not that there isn't enough food, right? The problem is will to get it places. The problem is never there's not enough resources. And so it jumped out to me, and I wanted to bring it up because you were making such a, making that point so well.
That's a very important point, though.
Yeah.
Think about, whether you like vaccines or hate vaccines, I'm not here to debate that. Bill Gates was a gatekeeper for vaccines to Africa because of his patents.
Yes, it's not famine-prone countries. It's countries we decide not to help. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Look at Monsanto. They've got a patent on seeds.
Yeah.
We just need to be really, really brutally honest with the fact that this is a business model and an ideological proclivity for protecting private capital at the expense of society. And it is baked into everything. It's a huge war that we've got to wage. And unfortunately, I don't think enough people are aware of the consequences or even the terms of the battle. I don't think they understand the terms of the battle, but the battle is there. It's just not really being fought in an effective way right now. Hopefully programs like this allow people to start thinking a little differently about what we're up against.
I wanted to also ask about this story that I'm going to give some credit to NPR for really focusing on this story about what can happen to parents who lose their children, have their children taken away and put into foster care. I did not know this, but these parents can be made by states to pay for the cost of the foster care for their children, which means you are handed a bill from, $8,000, $20,000 in one of the cases that they highlighted. And then failure to pay that bill can be used against parents in court proceedings that strip them of their parental rights. And NPR, in the last year, it's done 3 different stories on this topic, which is cool. It notes that the governments raise very little money trying to collect this blood from these stones. They lose money on it because these are poor people who don't have that money to give. So you're not making any money chasing these already poor people down for the cost of foster care. You're using that failure to pay against them in proceedings to take their children away from them. And this goes against what states are directed to do, which is to try to reunite families whenever possible, whenever it's safe. And again, it's just, we have states spending money to try to harass poor families for insignificant sums. While again, any amount can be created and flooded to Wall Street anytime there's a crisis that threatens their liquidity. I feel like it's important to point this out, Steve. It doesn't make any financial sense to try and hunt these people down for $8,000.
Now, you can look at this with child support. The government, the local government, the state government, the federal government could literally make these people whole. I oftentimes think about it if you're married and a husband gets laid off, the whole family deals with the layoff. It's not like the husband is suddenly given child support to come out of a blood from a stone.
Yeah.
They literally recognize the family has, but the minute you say, okay, well, we don't like each other, we're getting a divorce, now all of a sudden, whoever that non-custodial parent is, whether it be man or woman, is now forced to be basically an indentured servant, finding money wherever they can, or they're going to go to jail, or they'll lose their tax return, or they will lose their right to drive, or they will. It's a very, very punitive approach to dealing with debt slavery. And, regardless of whether it's a noble cause, the kids, my God, we got to feed the kids.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that the individual who has been laid off, I mean, think about the movie Falling Down, okay, with Michael Douglas. One of the best movies of all time.
Seriously.
Like literally a theme movie. It is, I am not economically viable.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's going to happen to the guy? And anecdotally, I watched a really ridiculous Kurt Russell movie during Christmas called The Christmas Chronicles.
It's actually
And
a pretty good
Santa's
kids movie. Yeah.
He's talking to the cop, though, and he says, point blank, hey, if you keep robbing everybody at Christmas spirit, you're going to start seeing more people fill up your jail cell, because when people are poor and they're really depressed and they don't have much hope, they tend to commit crimes. I was like, what? This isn't a movie? That's real, man. That's real right there, man. That's real stuff. And I got to celebrate. My kids heard it. I was like, yeah, because this is the kind of lessons you don't hear enough in mainstream media or movies. But what you're dealing with, especially with them taking kids away, this is about shaming poverty, shaming not having money. This is about debt, putting people in jail for debt. I mean, debt prisons, debt crime, you name it. I mean, these are horrible things that are built to ensure that nobody is class jumping, that if you're at the bottom, you're going to stay at the bottom. And all you have to do is look at Ferguson, back when you had Michael Brown laying in the street for hours, right? That whole community, their police officers are funded by fines, fees, and penalties. They're not funded by the federal government that could handle that, so that the local community isn't predated upon to fund these things. Mm-hmm. This is all big scam, man. It's all big scam. And it's really, we are accepting of it because we think private property is king. Mm-hmm. In reality, we have to disabuse ourselves of that and start thinking about what the public purpose is. Or these folks are going to lose their kids because it's part of a penalty. It's a penalty of being poor. Mm. It's intended to make you look at your shoelaces instead of look people in the eye. It's intended to make you feel like you're unworthy, that they should take your kids because you're a bad parent. And they want you to feel that way because they want you to be malleable and willing to do whatever. And if you aren't, they want to have enough laws on the books to make sure that they can fatten the private prison industry or the drug testing industry or any of these other industries that are based on feeding off of poverty.
Well,
so poverty is friggin' enriching, isn't it?
I want to ask about exactly this. I thought this is a shout out to producer Ben, who sent me this. It's a Bloomberg newsletter that focuses on the year in crypto. And it's called The Year Crypto Started to Look Just Like Another Financial Instrument. And I thought it had some great tidbits in it. It starts off by saying at the beginning of the year, there were two dominant narratives about the transformative potential of cryptocurrencies. The first was that crypto was a radical new financial system and that you could use it to get rich. And this proved to be true, at least for a while. The second, that there's something special about the technology underlying crypto that lends itself to becoming the architecture of a better, fairer internet. That one has not panned out. And so it goes on to say, there is no doubt that crypto is finance and that some people did get rich with it. Sure, the whole game was a shaky playground for financial speculation, and the people who have made crypto fortunes did so in large part by extracting money from a larger group of people who ended up poorer. But that's how financial systems often work. I thought that was a hell of a thing to print, and I'm really glad that they did. It also says that the sort of idea of a blockchain-based internet was useful because it created an illusion that there was something more to crypto than gambling, which could appeal to people who aren't gamblers. Mm-hmm. So I have to think, again, are regular people, like the people who watched the Super Bowl and saw the likes of Matt Damon and Larry David and the rest say, oh, yeah, crypto, it's this new cool thing that's totally legit. Put your money in it. And so I was glad to see them say this about crypto and very glad to see them say this about other financial industries. And so, as we're sort of all looking at how crypto should be regulated so we don't see the kind of chaos we've seen this year, maybe we should look at all the other things that it looks just like, Steve.
Oh, wow. You're preach, girlfriend, preach. Obviously, one of my heroes, Bill Black, who chased down the Keating Five and has been all over Countrywide and every other elite control fraud that's gone on in this 3 and 4 part act of our government saying the quiet part out loud as these collapses occur. You need to understand that this is part of the racket that is capital. It is the revolving door from Wall Street to government. It is all these factors that go into it. And crypto, for all its warts, has some uses that have nothing to do with speculation. Mm-hmm. The speculators tend to be the libertarian types and poor people who are duped into being the pump for the rich people's dump. And that part set aside because it's a separate function. But over here on the other side, I mean, you look at countries like Iran, and you look at countries like Palestine, and you look at other countries that are drowning in foreign debt and have sanctions on them, et cetera. There has to be ways for them to function. Mm-hmm. And so there are legitimate opportunities there because really we're talking about anonymous transactions at some level, but that's the concept, at least in theory. But in reality, it has not served that purpose. I think there is a legitimate use value of crypto. It's just not in the speculation mm-hmm. side of things. And to your larger point, and I think this is really what it comes down to, is you get these rich people that everybody loves as their favorite Tom Brady, FTX poster child, or you get some Congress critters, ironically. I mean, you had, oh my God, what is her name?
Gillibrand?
Kristen.
Gillibrand?
Yes, mm-hmm. Out
Gillibrand?
there picking up crypto herself.
Yeah.
And so you've got a situation where we have allowed people to believe that this is a great investment when in reality it's a Ponzi scheme.
The Ponzi scheme, exactly.
And it is a Ponzi scheme because it does not survive without new dupes filling in the thing, and it's dependent on old dupes cashing out so that it falls down again, and then the next batch come in and say, yeah, buy, hodl, mm-hmm. and they're out there buying it up, and then they dump it. And it's a very, very sad, it's like the lottery. Let's make the lottery accessible for every poor person. Let's make Keno available at every, local bar where sad sack Joey is going in there crying in his beer over his divorce. Let's go ahead and get him over there playing Keno to pay his mortgage. On and on and on. This is not an accident. And it's only gotten worse the more sports betting has become more, acceptable now. Mike, do you remember that it was impossible to bet on sports and people were losing their Hall of Fame credentials for betting on the game? And now all of a sudden it's a thriving industry promoted by the sports themselves.
My 18-year-old told me just yesterday that the minute that he turned 18, he started to be bombarded with advertising for sports betting. Mm-hmm. Like they knew it. They knew it, and they've been just bombarding him. Outrageous.
It is outrageous, but it makes the point, right, that you have to be able to look at these things with a nuanced approach. Like a hammer in the hands of an architect or in the hands of a carpenter can turn out a beautiful home, beautiful piece of furniture. A hammer in the hands of Ted Bundy is a murder weapon. Mm-hmm. So crypto, I don't know the proper use cases for everything. There are use cases out there. I mean, I personally I have a good friend named Brett Scott who is a fan of, revolting against the digital FinTech space and choosing to pay in cash as kind of a revolutionary act. And in reality, I mean, they're clamping down even on that, and I think that something like anything above $10,000 was the threshold, and now I think it's even lower. I think it's like $600 has to be reported or something. I mean, it's one of those things where they're intentionally trying to drive you to a controlled transaction space where the government can observe and spy on your transactions.
Mm-hmm.
So having that civil libertarian minded approach to privacy, it's not an unreasonable thing. And realizing that crypto has some components, has some properties that make it attractive to that space. And it does have a valid use case there to hide transactions.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody that wants to be anonymous is not a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, this is such a big subject, Michelle
Mm-hmm.
and John, that to nail that down to one thing, it's really a challenge. I believe that the left, and I consider myself very much a part of that space, has to recognize that just because libertarians polluted it with their sound money, gold bug minded approach to things doesn't mean that everything about it is bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the speculation side that I'm concerned with and the private nature of it, right? And I think that I have a split personality, because on one hand, I'm 9/10 revolutionary, but the other side is, hey, we live in a society that isn't ready for that. And so how do we survive in this society today? And so it's a real catch-22 to balance your needs for today with your long-term ideological view of what makes the world work. And I don't really have a clean answer for you that I can fit within a soundbite, unfortunately.
No.
If we have time, I want to ask Steve a question that I'm also going to ask Jim Kavanaugh in a few minutes. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, said more than a month ago that if too many Republicans run for president, it would guarantee the nomination of Donald Trump in 2024 because they would split the anti-Trump vote. The conventional wisdom is that Trump is the only Republican that Joe Biden can beat, at least at this early stage. It's possible that as many as a dozen Republicans could run for the Republican nomination. What do you think about this whole situation?
Well, I think you saw that play out with the Democrats.
Right.
Again, let me be crystal clear. I have a very skeptical eye on elections.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With that in mind, you saw them flood the primary market with every Tom, Dick, and Harry, from Klobuchar to Buttigieg to, people I don't even remember.
Mm-hmm.
Just rando.
Hickenlooper.
Almost 20 people running for the Democratic nomination at one point.
Yeah.
And then slowly but surely, performatively, they all backed out and then fell behind Biden, who had been busy sleeping. He had been hiding out in the basement or something forever. The guy didn't even show up for the first 6, events. It's amazing. Bernie was winning everything.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the establishment collapsed around him. But by diffusing, by putting so many anti-whatever candidates out there, you literally did. The Tulsi crowd,
Right.
Just repulsive, right? This whole thing made Biden an inevitability. So how do I think it plays out on the Republican side? I don't see any difference.
Mm-hmm.
I see zero difference. I think Donald Trump has a solid core akin to what Bernie Sanders had.
Mm-hmm.
The difference being that the Republicans actually don't have superdelegates in the way the Democrats do, in terms of they allowed populism to win.
Right.
So how does that look on the Republican side? I think it looks a lot like what you just saw. And I do think that would in turn end up putting Donald Trump probably at the top of the ticket, because the people that are Donald Trumpers are pure Donald Trumpers. Now, I will tell you where it gets a little crazy is DeSantis. We may not like him. He may be evil. He may be horrible, and he is all the above. But that man right there is the scary version of Trump, because he's competent.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Steve Gumbrime, we've got to let you go. But if you want more of Steve, you can go find Macro and Cheese, his podcast. You can look for him on YouTube at The Rogue Scholar. You can go to Real Progress and Real Progress in Action. You can find work with Status Coup. Steve Grunbein's all over the internet. And thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you both. Have a great one.